I'm with two gentlemen, Gabriel Carter and Nigel Jones. Now, strange enough, it's quite an achievement to get two people who are of the left together in on one table in Jersey, because they're quite rare. So let's start with young Gabriel. How did you discover that possibly socialism or left-wing views were possibly for you?
How did I discover socialism? So my family, my mum, she benefited from free university and came from a bit of a working class background. So she kind of was always a socialist growing up. And my dad developed into a socialist as he got older. My granddad, he was one too. It's a kind of my family was all kind of
in Jersey or elsewhere.
In Jersey, yeah, they were all of the left, and so I grew up in that kind of environment and those kinds of values. I went to Quaker meeting and those kinds of values were getting promoted there, and so I started reading more. I read books about socialism and it complemented those values as well, and so it developed into a kind of coherent political worldview. When I was I must have been about 14, I kind of coalesced around a real socialist worldview.
Do you meet many socialists or people of the left? Do you meet many, or is
No, there aren't many around here, are they?
How about you, Nigel? How did you get into this strange club?
Not that way. My parents didn't know or care, as far as they were concerned, anything about politics when I was growing up. They wouldn't have known the difference between a socialist and a fascist. But when I got to university, my education started at double time because I was pretty much behind the times on things like that. So my fellow students quickly got me up to speed, and I could see the sense of it from the minute they started talking. And I've kept with it all along. Although I have to say at the moment, I'm not particularly fighting socialist causes. I would say I'm fighting environmentalist causes, but I don't like that phrase either, because it's like the environment was somewhere else. One of the boxes on your diagram is the environment, and that's the whole point, is that the environment is the big circle within which everything else happens. And
well, if you're interested in a fair deal for people, you have to start looking at fair deal for animals, everybody, don't you? So you have to look at the structure of everything, don't you, if you're really curious in your mind.
You do, and actually even the word people is an interesting one, because I believe back in olden times on the ship's people could be considered to include not only the ship's men, who were the people who were meant to be there, but also the women who weren't meant to be there, but also probably the monkey, the cats, and various other animals could be included in the list of the ship's people. And so I do try to make an effort whenever I say the people or us to be including the spiders, the microbes, the fungus, as well as the mammals and birds and the fish and the humans.
This extraordinary decision which the states of Jersey have agreed to make about climate change and a commitment, I mean, is that realistic?
Well, I think I've read quite a lot of people saying that the reason these climate emergencies are getting passed in various levels of government all over Britain and here now in Jersey is largely because the people passing them haven't got any idea what it entails. And it's probably best not to explain it, because then they wouldn't be getting passed. The climate emergency is an enormous problem that has taken us probably 10,000 years to get into, maybe only the last 200 to really dig it deep with the Industrial Revolution, but it's a multi-century, worldwide enormous problem. And yet we have 1 year to create a plan of how we're going to get out of it, and another 2 years to implement that plan in, 10 years to implement that plan in. It's so unlikely that we're ever going to get all of that consensus together.
But the message is, I don't know what message they give you at school, Gabriel, is if you don't do it pretty damn quick, it's all going to be, the game's up, we're all finished.
Yeah. Everyone's well aware that if something isn't done within the next, as I said, within the next 10 years, then that's that. It's not reversible, and we're going to have to live with the consequences of everything that human society has done in the last 10,000 years. And our teachers know that, students know that. Even politicians know that, but it's a question of doing something about it rather than just kind of declaring a climate change emergency, which doesn't really mean anything. anything. It's just a bit of a gesture. It's easy to say that you've declared a climate change emergency. It's a lot harder to do something about it, and we saw that with Rob Ward's proposition about free buses, because they vote to declare a climate change emergency, but when it comes to doing something about it, it gets voted down. It's too much money.
What do they actually teach you at school about? What are they allowed to say to you at school about this? I mean, you can't preach to youngsters, oh, the end of the world is nigh, which was an often expressed view, but it's not. Teachers aren't really allowed to say that, are they?
Well, they're pretty explicit whenever you talk about it. Teachers aren't going to kind of say to you that the world is ending, but they are pretty explicit when you get them to drill down to it, that they're aware of what's going on. They know that climate change is a serious issue, and that if we don't do something about it, then the end of the world, it might be nigh. They're pretty honest about it.
And they're not allowed to form you into political groupings.
No, they get
if
sacked
you
for
do
that.
set up a political grouping at school, are you allowed to campaign at school?
Yeah, I've put up posters for the Jersey Palace and Solidarity campaign before at my school, and I had to have a chat with the head teacher about it. But they let you. They're not kind of in the business of clamping down on you and telling you what to think. Either way.
There's a very famous young lady touring the world at the moment. She's been asking her fellow school comrades to stop going to school. Is that an activity which has happened here?
There were a bunch of year 12s that got involved in doing that. This was last academic year. They'd go down and do whatever on do the school strike and in the Royal Square and stuff. I didn't get involved in that personally because I was in year 11, and so it was a lot more difficult for me to kind of say to them, I'm striking, because they all have their free periods and stuff to do that. It's a much more free environment when you're in sixth form. But yeah, I didn't get involved in that personally. But a lot of people at my school did, and it was pretty commendable, to be honest. What
do you make of that young lady, Nigel? She's had a remarkable impact.
Yes.
I don't know how she's managed to get the eye or the ear of the news media, but she's done it, hasn't she?
Yes, she has. Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
We're talking about. Yes, and she has managed to do it. And I have seen several other young people appearing on YouTube making equally impassioned statements, and you get the feeling that they're putting themselves up to be the other Greta Thunberg, and of course you can't do that now. She has cornered that market, and all power to her for doing so. I think it's some combination of her autistic problems that make her speak very simply, very directly, without fear or favour, which has endeared her to many, many hearts. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that that's happened. It also highlights the fact that autism isn't a disability. It can
That's
be, as
right.
she says,
That's another aspect of the campaign.
It is.
From the campaign, the big campaign, the climate campaign, is it going to lead anywhere?
It has to. Yes, it is going to this time. One of the first actions that Extinction Rebellion took, and I haven't found this documented fully, but I've heard it a few times, is the first people they invaded the office and occupied was Greenpeace. They took them a big cake to thank them for all the work they'd done over the years. And then they made a little speech, and one of the phrases from that speech has become a little famous, which is, they said that Greenpeace has presided over 40 years of abject failure, and yet they've wrapped it up as incremental progress.
Right, that's right.
Because, and it is so true, I've been involved in Friends of the Earth as a member, Greenpeace where I could, Sea Shepherd. There's dozens of these people, and I thought, oh yeah, this is the one, I'll get involved in them. The Transition Town movement as well, which I dragged Jersey into with JIT. But none of them had the real drive to say, we have to change everything now. And that's the XR have come along with that, and that's the first time I've seen that. And I think that is terribly exciting, terribly hopeful, and it fills me with enthusiasm.
Well, I did write a small piece. I was arrested when I was 16 with Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I joined the Committee of 100 as it was then with old Bertrand Russell. We thought we were going to, this would finish the government off, we'd all get ourselves arrested. They wouldn't be able to cope, they just stopped arresting us, didn't they? So they soon solved that problem. So, and CND rambled on, and it's still going around the world, and it's protested by the millions. They're still building nuclear power stations and all the nuclear stuff. It's never been resolved. And now the environmentalists are embracing it because it produces clean, so-called electricity. And we need clean, so-called electricity rather than nasty petrol.
Yeah, no, there are a range of shades of environmentalists, and the true deep greeners won't be embracing that. The thing is that you have to choose your battles to fight, and that isn't a good one to pick up if you, at the same time, you're saying we need to get everyone to switch from oil-powered to electric. Especially here in Jersey, we can at least say, well, the French electricity is very clean. It really isn't, because the contaminants out of that power station at Cap de la Hague, when it is eventually decommissioned, will be a massive problem for tens or hundreds of thousands of years to come, and a problem that no one has got a solution for. So it's not a green solution. The green solutions are to do without. Next door to that, you could squeeze in solar panels and wind turbines, but where are they all going to go? They say they have a lifetime of 30 years. Where are they all going to be landfilled when the 30 years is up? I've owned a couple of solar panels when I used to have a boat. I had 2 on the back, and they were very useful for getting the batteries charged up when you'd been watching telly too late at night or leaving the lights on. But there was aluminium frames, there was aluminium sheets, there was the actual panels, there's the silicon wafers, there's the wiring, there's the fuses, the inverters. It's a huge performance getting solar panels to create...
You could devote your life, Gabriel, to loads of subjects. I mean, if you wanted to latch on to nuclear, there's a whole lifetimes of campaigning there. Plastic, you could just latch on to plastic.
Sure.
There's so many issues, single issues, which appear to be single issues, which you can latch on to, you can devote your lifetime to. But ultimately, the crunch is between, is capitalism viable, isn't it? That is the ultimate rock face that we've got to come up against, the status of capitalism.
Well, that's the whole big question about this environmental thing is can we create a green world within the framework of capitalism? And a lot of people would say no, we can't, because Marx's analysis of capitalism was that it just grows and grows and grows and you can't stop it. It's not a thing that humans do. It's just how the system works. And so the capitalism will devour the planet if it's not put a stop to, and that's just an inevitable fact. You can't. There is no such thing as green capitalism, and that's borne out in the fact that the only countries which are reaching sustainable development goals are countries like Nicaragua, like Cuba, these countries with left-wing governments that are environmentally committed and are willing to really put that action put their words into action in an economy that is not beholden to private interest. Nicaragua was one of the only countries that didn't sign up to the Paris Climate Accord because they didn't think it went far enough. They're extremely...
Of course, in microcosm, this little island has got the worst of every world, hasn't it? Because the problems which everybody's on about, population control, with the capitalist society we've got, you can't stop population growth because it depends upon growth.
Exactly.
There's a dilemma which cannot be solved, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole thing is dependent on growth and growth and growth. And if you want to have degrowth, or if you want to have degrowth at all, then the government must play a massive, bigger role in the economy, because private companies aren't just gonna turn around one day and abolish themselves. The government needs to be there to step in, take control, and say, this can't happen anymore. We need to put a stop to this growth, and if those executives won't have that, then there need to be consequences, and only the state can do that.
What's going on in the middle? They've got this young man here, they've got the young girl in Scandinavia, David Attenborough telling us he's 90, I think, isn't he? What's happened to all the people in between? You're in between.
Oh, I'm not. I'm on the upper end. I've been retired a while now. I think in your youth you have the enthusiasm. As a student, you have the time. Then the troubles of the world catch you up. They did for me. Your mortgage, your children, your wife. I didn't have any of those things, but I had enough troubles with the mortgage and the money. You end up just having to run to stand still through the middle of your life. And this is also built into capitalism, it's built into consumerism, it's built into the whole way that our world is structured, because those are the most productive people in society, and so those are the people that the corporations can make the most money out of. And so there is a whole range of carrots and sticks ready for you as you pass through your 20s to trip you up, catch you, get you down flat, and then sit on you until you've coughed up every bit of useful work you can produce in your life, and somebody else has taken away most of the money that you created, most of the wealth you created.
I mean, I watch the sites which you write on, and I see that the views you express are so different from people, say, who work in the finance industry. They're so different from people who are doing farming, but people who work in the finance industry, you're a million miles away from. There's no way that you can ever meet minds as though.
Well, the Extinction Rebellion approach is that if the natural living world starts to collapse around us, which is going to happen if we don't do something to stop it doing so, then that's going to hurt everybody's life and hopes, whether you are a capitalist or a socialist, whether you are young or old, whether you are rich or poor. And so there is no reason why any class, group or subdivision of society shouldn't be involved in XR, because the crisis is going to hurt everyone if it isn't averted. But you're right, there are people who are closer in their mindset to being able to embrace the kind of things that XR talks about, which, you know, includes the way that governments work, the way that businesses work and everything. There are people who are closer to that than others. But one of the bits of theory of XR is that 3.5% of the population in active rebellion is enough to persuade any government. And apparently they have social science research from across history and across the world that shows that there's a tipping point when about 3.5% of the population are in rebellion, whether that's on the streets or whatever.
But you'll get people turn out, line in the sand, you'll get quite a few people turn out in St. Juan's and appear to be protesting about something.
Yeah, but those are one-offs. That's a one-off event, like marching against the Iraq War through London. 1 million people turned out, the Iraq War went ahead because they all went home again. If they had stayed in London, if they brought tents, as the Occupy movement suggested, and stayed out on the streets, and if they had made a bit more of a nuisance of themselves, been a little more disruptive than politely walking down the agreed route and then going home nicely at the end.
There's no A-level in protest, is there, Gabriel?
Sadly not, no.
Do you think there ought to be? What would it be? What could it be put in to be acceptable for educational system? An A-level in looking at things differently.
Well, there's already kind of like A-levels in politics and stuff like that, but they, you know, you could certainly have things to talk about, you know, it's like civic engagement, how to influence the government, and how to kind of not organise protests, obviously, because that'd be a bit much for any educational system, but certainly thinking at school about ways that you can push the government towards what you want them to do, because they don't do that. You know, they don't talk about how you can influence your representative, how you can get out on the streets, how you can do whatever. So things like that.
But the establishment does that and gets away with it, don't they? They tell people what to think and nobody questions it. That's because the establishment says that.
Yeah.
But if you're a protest, an alternative view, you mustn't say that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's that they have their like ideological hegemony in the world, and that permeates into schools, obviously, and so schools and universities as well. Universities are a big example of this. Become this kind of manufactory for the ideology that already is hegemonic in society. You know, they reproduce it.
In this world of turning things upside down, should we welcome people like Trump and Boris? I mean, are they going to force change upon us, which we didn't?
Well, in a negative way, maybe, but no, I don't welcome them at all. There is an overall word, I believe, populism, for what they do. It's a very scary process where they become jovial clowns. They get the average person on their side with a few jokes and a few lewd remarks, and then they lead you off down the garden path towards all their mates getting even richer and you working even harder, which is, you know, as we've said, the way capitalism works. They're part of the system, but they're on the wrong extreme of it. Now, I suppose you could argue that if we get all the way to one extreme, it's bound to cause reaction and bring it back, but this isn't the way to do it. It's much better to start from where we are rather than allow people to lead us off in the opposite direction in the hope that it'll twang us back somehow.
So what do you think, Gabriel? You've got to be the voice of hope, you see, because you're the young person and you've drawn the short straw.
For sure. Well, the thing about people like kind of Trump and Boris is that even if they push towards one extreme, and people might say, oh yeah, it will swing back, in the meantime, it puts the planet at risk, it puts people's lives at risk, people die. And you have to start from this position of hope, which says, no, we don't need this kind of accelerationist view of the world where you've got to push it towards an extreme, push the contradictions as far as they go. You've got to actively push for the things you want, push for socialism, push for environmentalism, and do that rather than relying on these kind of guys to drive the contradictions so far apart that people can't bear it anymore, because that has actual impact on real people's lives.
Okay, well, the Messiah is a long time coming, but for the new Messiah, but we shall leave it there for now.